just about how do we rehabilitate these people, ladies and gentlemen, but this is a debate on to assess which rehabilitation process can the prisoner feel that he must regret his he must regret his act, that he must be reintegrated back to society, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. Because if you analyze what the opening opposition told us was, we must humanize this, and we must make their experience as good as possible so that they won't retaliate back to the state, and for them to live a normal life, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. But the one problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is that going to prison should not be a vacation. People should not enjoy being in prison, but rather, being in prison should make them afraid of being in prison. Being in prison makes them want to regret their actions, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. And these luxuries that you provide them doesn't necessarily target the idea that these people are not enjoying their stay, so that when the time that they have already served their sentence, then they are already much more equipped into understanding why they should never and should not do those actions again, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. The previous speaker told us certain policies or these punishments should serve as a reflection of the social realities, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. But if you analyze, we're looking at the context, or we're working on the assumption that these government or welfare states have done nothing wrong, and these welfare states have done everything they can to provide every opportunities and luxuries for their people to live good lives, ladies and gentlemen. And the mere fact, regardless of it is a heinous or non-heinous crime, the mere fact that they have violated that social contract that has done good to them, ladies and gentlemen, already serves enough for warrant for them to be punished on a greater scale, ladies and gentlemen, and depriving them of those above minimum standard luxuries, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. First, let me respond to the previous speakers two arguments. First, on this idea that we must humanize this punishment, and secondly, the idea of retaliation. On the first argument, ladies and gentlemen, you must remember, when do you humanize something? Because in non-welfare states, they humanize as much as possible their punishments because it is a recognition that the state has done something wrong. But in this context, ladies and gentlemen, the state has already provided every opportunity for the individual to live an outstanding life, for him to live well, but that individual necessarily broke that social contract, and that individual didn't come good with his part of the bargain, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. That's why we don't want to humanize it, because this individual didn't necessarily come into that kind of didn't do well in terms of following through with his social contract, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
There are crimes that, despite the lack of or the absence of intent, you are still criminalized. Like carrying an unlicensed firearm without killing a person, you will be placed in prison. What kind of violation in the society of hurt did you give to the state that you can live a cruel life?
Ladies and gentlemen, you must analyze on how long will that individual necessarily be in prison. Obviously, if it's still a minor sentence, then he won't experience that suffering or that small suffering for long. But the point is, that individual will more likely regret violating that contract, ladies and gentlemen, or violating that law, because obviously he won't enjoy that stay being in prison, ladies and gentlemen. On the second idea on retaliation, obviously, if we want them not to enjoy being in prison, ladies and gentlemen, that's why the idea is we don't want them to think that going into prison is something that is good and that's going to give them a better life, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. What is the extension coming for you from the Deputy Prime Minister? First, I'm going to prove to you on how do we uphold social justice, ladies and gentlemen, on our side, and secondly, why is a harder lifestyle in prison the best way to uphold the criminal justice in this system, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house? Yeah.
So are you telling me that welfare states like the United States has no fault whatsoever and they're the perfect utopia, and therefore whenever, for example, your mother or your father abuses a child because of the inaction of the state, it's not the fault of the state?
If you look at the United States, they don't necessarily give above minimum prison cells, ladies and gentlemen. They actually have one of the harshest and strictest prison cells in the world, ladies and gentlemen. That's why if you look at Guantanamo Bay, or even certain places, ladies and gentlemen, in the United States, it has the scariest prisons, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. We should look at the context of Iceland, ladies and gentlemen, or New Zealand, wherein they allow or they even give the prisoners time to go to the swimming pool, ladies and gentlemen, have big rooms that can fit a flat screen TV or anything else, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the kinds of amenities that we don't want them to have, ladies and gentlemen. Because the idea of social justice here, ladies and gentlemen, is not just allowing the individual to be reintegrated or to be rehabilitated, but rather making the individual regret the crime that he has committed, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. Because if you analyze it, the state has done everything they can, and they have provided them every opportunity for them to live as upstanding citizens, ladies and gentlemen. And we think the mere fact that they violated that is already sensing enough rhetoric from the state that we should not tolerate this anymore, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. That's why the idea that social justice, in terms of making the individual pay for his crimes, and secondly, allowing the people to see that going to prison isn't necessarily a good thing, because it's not a vacation, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. On the last idea, on why is a harder lifestyle the best way to uphold the criminal justice? Because how do we necessarily improve the psychological mindset of the individual in terms of reintegrating or rehabilitating that individual? Because on their side, you don't necessarily make them regret their crimes, but rather, you just make them live a normal life and hope that this individual will find a better life in terms of wanting to live that life of being an upstanding citizen, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is somewhat regrettable because you're missing the very idea of a criminal justice, ladies and gentlemen. The idea that you're punishing that individual to make him regret the crime, ladies and gentlemen, not just making that individual follow the law, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. The idea is we want to facilitate a proper punishment for this individual, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the best way for them to realize that there is something wrong, and giving them the minimum prison cells, ladies and gentlemen, like a small bed or even a minimum allowable exercise time in the playground, ladies and gentlemen, is enough for them to realize their basic needs, ladies and gentlemen, but at the same time not enjoy their stay, for them to realize that these prison cells isn't something that the state isn't something that will help them, ladies and gentlemen, but rather that will punish them and make them realize that they have done something wrong. So for all those reasons, we're proud to propose.
Rights, ladies and gentlemen, are relative. It is defined by your society. That's the reason why, in the Philippines, it's a fundamental right to have an access to primary education. To other societies, ladies and gentlemen, such as welfare states, college, for example, is a fundamental right. What we say coming from opening opposition is that above minimum living is a fundamental experience of a person in that society. And you as a state who has the capability to provide that to everyone, even to prisoners, but decided not to give them because they committed one mistake, not necessarily because they were inherently bad, you are a cruel state. We think that if you wanted to punish them, you can punish them without necessarily becoming cruel, without necessarily destroying the necessarily societal accepted fundamental right of above minimum life. I have a lot of things to say which rebuttals are integrated. The first is, why is uncomfortability in prison not that important to rehabilitation? Second, do prisoners deserve luxury above minimum facilities in welfare states? Lastly, how facilities is important in integration, because what we wanted to do is to mirror that society in which he will integrate when he comes out. Firstly, sit down. Do prisoners deserve above minimum facilities in welfare states? We say, ladies and gentlemen, they do. Because they are also members of the societies and that society's success. In the past, they have continuously paid tax, ladies and gentlemen. They were part of your labor force and they contributed in one way or another to the success of your government. They also have family, ladies and gentlemen, who care to them or necessarily pay tax to your government as well. But more importantly, these people are also your consumer in the past. They bought goods, they make sure that money will flow and all those stuff. These people, ladies and gentlemen, after sentence of service, will go out on the country and will necessarily be loyal to you and help you, ladies and gentlemen. So what is the point? The point is that they're not useless people. The point is that they're not inherently enemies of the state, and we think that they don't deserve to be punished that cruel. But ladies and gentlemen, let's argue the mistakes and the criminal liability. Because we don't believe that just because you went to prison, then automatically you're a bad person. There are a lot of social realities, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to check. Firstly, they're not born inherently bad. Some social realities, like for example, you're a woman, and the state wasn't there to protect you when a man attempted to rape you, and the way for you to protect yourself was to kill that person. But because of the court and the high level of beyond reasonable doubt, and you were never able to meet that, you went to prison cell. Are you telling me that that intent to defend yourself warrants a cruel life, ladies and gentlemen, on that person? We do not believe so. More importantly, there are also people by accident, by negligence, ladies and gentlemen, who do not have intent, who did not want to kill someone, but accidentally killed someone. Are you telling me that that mistake means that they should suffer a cruel life? All these examples, ladies and gentlemen, all the imperfections in the society means that these people are victims too. So we do not believe that they needed to be penalized. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the state behavior. Do we think that the state hates criminals? We do not believe so. Why do we have pardon? Why do we have amnesty? Why do we have laws such as mitigating circumstances? Or the proof of reasonable doubt is so high, ladies and gentlemen, for conviction. Why do we allow religion to exist in these prison cells? Why do we allow people to visit them and to have minimum contacts with them? Because we understand that despite the mistake, that despite of the pain that they cause to you, to one victim or to that state, you understand that that person is a human being and that person is a member of your community. That maybe, ladies and gentlemen, he just committed a mistake because he was not necessarily capable of interpreting a lot of things. Like when he was consumed by alcohol at the end of the day, he may not necessarily be that intelligent to make that choice. We think the state understands these social realities, and the state makes legislation to ensure that when one person goes to cell, he will not suffer. That's why we think our policy is in line with it. But before going to my second argumentation,
why is it that if an individual who is guilty of killing an entire family and convicted of reclusion perpetua deserve a lifetime imprisonment with an environment of
Sir, you're overburdening opening opposition because we believe the assumption in this motion is that the penal system vary too. Like if you are a heinous terrorist, obviously you will not be given to a normal citizen penal system. You are isolated. You are brought to Guantanamo Bay. So we do not believe that all penal system will be uniform. The distinction is that we think that we are just defending the average above minimum, ladies and gentlemen, to be given to average criminals. Sit down. Why is uncomfortability not important to rehabilitation? Because they failed to miss the link. Why is the setup or the environment of that prison important for you for realize and for important for you to learn your lesson? We don't think so. The strength of penal system, ladies and gentlemen, do not depend on the environment in which the person lives in, but on the programs and the activities that the government suffice so the person to realize. Why do we think that is still possible under our model? Because despite the fact that she has a good, ladies and gentlemen, bed, or she has a swimming pool, ladies and gentlemen, that she can share with other friends, we think the fact that she cannot have an independent choice to have sex with her loved one, the fact that she cannot buy iPod if she wants to, the fact that she does not understand if whether or not Justin Bieber is the famous right now, and all those stuff, ladies and gentlemen, allows you to make her still think that she was there for a wrong reason, or she was there because the state looked at her as a criminal. It's not as if that if you live on a bed, you will forget everything. It is not as if, ladies and gentlemen, that when you live on that above minimum level, you then have a fantasy, ladies and gentlemen, that you are a good person, that you go there because it's your vacation. We do not believe so. Because the strength of the penal system lies on a lot of things. Fair conviction rate, programs, rehabilitation activities, commensurate penalty, ladies and gentlemen, the changing of mindset by giving them adequate activities such as adequate labor, making them work, ladies and gentlemen, making them contribute to the society, and all those stuff. But lastly, why is this mirroring important? Because at the end of the day, what the state wants is for you to go out and integrate on that society. The problem with prison cells in all around the world is that it cannot catch up to the fastest pace of the world, ladies and gentlemen. So it means that when you live there, you do not know the time. You do not know what is happening. You do not know the evolution of expectations outside in the society. That's why when you go out, you cannot barely get a job. That's why when you go out, you do not know how to interact with people. You do not know how to deal with cell phones and all those stuff. As a matter of fact, the cruelty that that you necessarily orient them, ladies and gentlemen, will be carried to them, will be imprinted to them. So the moment they go out, they become dramatic. The moment they go out, they become more violent, ladies and gentlemen. What is the point coming from opening opposition? That society judged and defined that above minimum level of a life is a quality life. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we think that despite that you're a prisoner, the state has no ability to take that away from you because the state understands that you're not a bad person. You're not inherently an enemy of the state.
We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. We call it.
Hello. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove in court. When you try to take a look at that, Madam Speaker, it assumes that even if we do not really know if this person is inherently bad or if this person is inherently good, the assumption of the debate is that if a judgment has been given to that person already, are we willing then to give that person to the same kind of criminal justice system? We think, therefore, that there is still a standard difference, therefore, between people who commit heinous crimes and people who don't commit heinous crimes to begin with. Because we think that there's still a metric by which the other is punished more than the other, Madam Speaker. And that metric can be time. It can be other things, Madam Speaker. What do we mean by this? What we mean is that it's just unfair, Madam Speaker, if somebody is getting lesser punishment than the other, right? We think that unfairness only happens comparatively. But when you try to take a look at this, if we're giving them the same kinds of punishment, the only difference that you can give is maybe the amount of time they spend in that jail, for example. It means, therefore, that if you not committed the crime or if you're just inherently good, Mr. Speaker, but you committed that crime, maybe you'll get 3 years to begin with. That's why mitigating circumstances even exist, Madam Speaker, to reduce the metric by which everybody is subject to. It means, therefore, that they are subject to the metric of time, Madam Speaker, and if you are allowed to reduce that, it becomes fair as well to everybody who is subject to that same standard. It means, therefore, that everybody is experiencing punishment, but the degree of the punishment is not necessarily the same. The question in the debate, Madam Speaker, is that are the living conditions that everybody should be living in an above average living condition, or should it be just the bare minimum which is prescribed in any state law to begin with? We think that humanizing happens, Madam Speaker, under our model because you're still giving them the minimum standard of living, Madam Speaker, and if you live under those conditions, we think that your life is still humane. We think, therefore, that particular trade-off is justified because you're still living a humane life. I'll try to talk about that later on, right? But it told us, Madam Speaker, that maybe prisoners are better reintegrated in society under their model. We think that we agree with opening government when they say that you cannot fully reflect. But there was no middle analysis, Madam Speaker. We think that if you're a particular person who lives in that jail, it makes it easier for you to reflect on your wrong because you have time, Madam Speaker. And the purpose and the environment where you live in, Madam Speaker, necessarily has to be bad in order for you to regret that particular crime. Please sit down. And if this person reintegrating to society, Madam Speaker, the assumption should be that person has already fully reflected on the crimes he had committed. It means, therefore, that reintegration is also a value under our model because we think that this person would have reflected on the crime to begin with. We think that it's extremely important for us to understand that this person must be subject to an environment where he is not used to, Madam Speaker, an environment that is less than what he's been experiencing. Because who are these people who commit these crimes anyway? We think that these are people who don't even experience those above average standards that you're giving them in jail. It means, therefore, that these are people perhaps who are just getting the minimum out of that welfare state. It means, Madam Speaker, that what they experience outside the jail is arguably worse than what they experience inside the jail already. It means, therefore, Madam Speaker, that reintegration into society becomes more likely under our model because the assumption is that you should not repeat the offense. You should not want to go back to that particular prison to begin with. It means, therefore, that it is just a question of where this person becomes better at rehabilitating and reintegrating himself in society. We provide for that value.
If you said that this person lived an ugly life outside, why will he suddenly realize when he enters there and he experienced the same ugly life?
No, he's necessarily not going to experience the same ugly life because you have, inmates who rape you, maybe, Madam Speaker, or you have all the other people who make your life worse. We think that inherently jails were designed to make life bad for you in order for you to be able to reflect on those crimes to begin with. It doesn't work on the flip side, where things get better for you at the end of the day. Flashing minutes go. Let's try to take a look at the argument and let's go back to the context in which this debate really happens, Madam Speaker. This debate happens in public welfare states. And we think that under our model, public welfare states is a good conception of what public welfare is, and we think that part of public welfare is public safety. We think, Madam Speaker, that you must be able to prioritize that value, not just for the people or the prisoners, but for society as a whole. Because we think that we are achieving under our model, and we concede that we are tough on crime under our model. But the assumption of the tough on crime stand is you want that crime to be less likely to happen to begin with. Why? You want it to less likely to happen, Madam Speaker, because you want the safety of the people living there to be protected. And by nature, Madam Speaker, welfare states should be able to provide that kind of welfare to their people as well. Because we think that a safe environment is also something that these people deserve. But how exactly do we get there, Madam Speaker? We get there by actually not just humanizing the law, but actually trying to universalize society's conception of it. We think that there are going to be agreements in society about how harsh the law must be, or how harsh the punishment must be to a particular person. But when that disagreement happens, Madam Speaker, we think that you must side with the victims, Madam Speaker, you must side with the society as a whole that may be potential victim of that crime. It means therefore, Madam Speaker, that because some people would say that you should give this person, or the person himself would say that he deserves that particular life, we say on the converse that the people who may be affected with this crime would want otherwise. And we think that in order to create a better narrative in society that is against crime, Madam Speaker, we must be able to universalize the idea that if you commit crime, it's going to be tough on you. We think therefore, Madam Speaker, that when you do that, there's an effective deterrent that happens. Because everybody agrees that life in jail sucks, Madam Speaker. Nobody gets to say that maybe life in jail might be better to begin with. We think therefore that the narrative of deterrence is much better in our model. But why is deterrence the ultimate value in this debate? Deterrence is the ultimate value in this debate, Madam Speaker, other than reintegration, rehabilitation, or humanization, because we recognize that the propensity for crime to happen threatens the very welfare that welfare states want to protect of their people. We think that they deserve that kind of safety because it's a form of public welfare. We think therefore, Madam Speaker, that if you live in Denmark, for example, you must be subject to the same standards as everybody else in the world, because we think that there's a conception of what exactly is human rights, Madam Speaker, of what exactly do people deserve to begin with. We think therefore that since crime in society is going towards a more universalized conception of what justice is, we think that deterrence is more effective under our model because we solidify that unified stand. We think therefore we don't want crime to happen necessarily because as a citizen of a welfare state, you deserve safety. Thanks.
Government bench argues that imprisonment is always about making your life a living hell. And your honors, we tell you that this is the greatest lie that we have heard in the history of humanity. Because in countries where they have minimum and even below minimum living conditions, like the United States and the Philippines, we experience high rates of recidivism and relapse after we have sent convicts out to the real world. And yet, in Scandinavian states, where they have above minimum living conditions, they have the lowest crime rates, ladies and gentlemen, in the world. That's why closing opposition's extension would be, is proving why it works, ladies and gentlemen. And the first argument would be how creating above minimum living conditions for prisoners is targetive of the genesis of criminality, and secondly, how it creates a normative value on how society should treat its convicts once they go out to the real world. But before I proceed to that, allow me first to respond to the biggest mistake government bench in general made in this debate. They kept on saying that it weakens rehabilitation because we're not really depriving them of the outside world that they should have been deprived. But we're talking about, again, welfare states, Scandinavian states, where virtually they have the lowest criminal rates in the world. And they have the most successful rehabilitation programs, ladies and gentlemen. That's why most of the convicts there do not experience any relapse. They don't commit the same crimes that they were sent before. Now, my extension would further explain as to how it works. But more importantly, they never argued as to why civil liabilities For example, the payment of monetary damages to your victims that amounts to thousands of euros is not enough of a deterrent for you to not to commit the same crime. But secondly, community service are still there that makes sure that in your mind it is inculcated that what you did is actually wrong, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, we still have the rehabilitation that these guys are fighting for. The rest of my responses will be integrated in my arguments. But before I proceed, any points? None? Okay, good. Now, the first argument, Madam Chair, is how this particular policy is targeted of the genesis of criminality. Because it's not anymore about a moral question when someone commits a crime, ladies and gentlemen. It's not anymore that person is bad, that's why he stole something, or that's why he committed a particular crime. Right now, and because of the advancement of science, we were able to prove that criminality is all about the psychological condition of a particular person that led him to commit a particular crime. Although we live in a welfare state, but it's not a perfect society, where still individuals are subjected to abuses when they were children, or being beaten up by their husbands, for example, or other emotional abuses that scarred their personality, which led to the eventual criminality, ladies and gentlemen. When a child, as psychologically proven, is exposed to harsh conditions when they were growing up, is more likely to commit crimes when that individual reached the age of majority, ladies and gentlemen. That's why the battle right now is really not to make you scared of prisons, but to target it psychologically, ladies and gentlemen. And this is how above minimum living conditions takes them away from the same environment that paved the way for them to become criminals, ladies and gentlemen. Especially wherein what led to their eventual criminality was the lack of respect and dignity that these individuals suffered when they were outside. The same hostilities that they experienced, ladies and gentlemen, when they were children, or the same harshness, the conditions of reality that forced them to commit that particular crime. We take them away from that environment, ladies and gentlemen, by allowing them to experience the leisure that they never experienced outside, or even providing them the dignity that they never got when they were outside, ladies and gentlemen. Now, under their policy, what happens if we treat them harshly is we could even make them hardened criminals at the end of the day, especially for individuals who did not even commit heinous crimes, and yet you're willing them, and there is no commensurability as to the level of punishment that you are giving to them. It's not always about the length of time that you spend inside the prison, but the conditions that you are subjected to that is the basis of the degree of punishment that we impose upon them. You expose individuals to a hardened life that they never experienced outside. That's why in the United States, wherein we have a lot of relapse, because young teenagers who just committed simple jaywalking are exposed to the harshness of prison life, ladies and gentlemen, which eventually led to them joining ghettos or joining gangs, ladies and gentlemen, which made them more hardened criminals at the end of the day. Now, social contract, as what we've been using from this side, is only analyzed in one aspect. Because it's true that social contract is about punishment, but it's also about the obligation of the state on the part of the prisoner to rehabilitate him, and at the same time to treat him with respect and dignity, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we do it in the most humane possible way. And we do not do this because we think that the prisoner is far more important than the victim, but at this precise moment, it is the prisoner who is the most vulnerable member of society, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. That's why the quantum of proof to convict him is beyond reasonable doubt, and the presumption of innocence is there. It's to make sure that these prisoners are still respected and are treated carefully, and we do not give them the sense of hopelessness and the sense that the state, who is supposed to be there in times of need, has abandoned that prisoner, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let's go now to the second idea. Sure, first PI.
Okay, we think that the environment that the person was in was harsh to him to begin with. If we introduce him to a new kind of environment and he returns to the harsh environment that he once was in, do you think that the crime is less likely to happen, therefore?
Yes, that's what we've been arguing. But more importantly, we just do not send him out, but we also provide economic
economic advantages and benefits for the individual so as not to recreate the same environment that he was in. But on the second idea, it becomes a normative value on how society should treat its convicts. Since the dawn of humanity, we have always relegated our convicts to the lowest pedestal of society, and that the remnants of the past are carried over right now in the present. The way we treat them, the place where we put them in, even the clothes that we make them wear, and the lifestyle that we subject them for a short period of time is a recognition of how we still think lowly of these criminals, and that is translated to society on how society treats its criminal. If the state itself would lead the way to treat them with dignity and to treat them with respect, that also translates to the outside rehabilitation of individuals when society thinks and sees that these individuals are in fact human and should not be subjected to the harsh treatments that they have been subjected since time immemorial. For all of these reasons, and in the name of justice, side with closing opposition.
Hater.
There's a difference between how are you going to treat these individuals. Like for instance, there's a difference between putting them on a simple jail on a simple prison, for instance, on a simple room with a single pillow and a single bed, but still respecting their minimum rights to begin with. And that's the difference, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition bench argues that it's okay for you to tolerate, for instance, the leisure or providing them even swimming pool. We think that there's a difference between giving them, Mr. Speaker, and respecting still their human rights, but telling them that what you did is wrong and you should not do it later on. But the point coming from opposing government is this. The simple idea of deterrence is very important, which is how you protect the public safety to start with. And that's the reason why, under their model, even if we assume that it wasn't even the fault of the people who committed this crime, those crimes are committed to start with. It means that there are victims, Mr. Speaker, and members of this House. It means that there is a danger that's happening in the status quo. There's two things I want to argue. There's two things I want to discuss this debate. Firstly, why is this in principle wrong? Secondly, why is it that under the justice system, justice system of welfare state is primarily wrong to start with? Let's go to the first one. Why is this in principle wrong? Because the justification coming from opposing opposition is this: that one, it's not the fault of this individual to be there. Sometimes they came from harsh environment. That's why they committed this crime. Secondly, they told you that in order for us to make them realize that what they did is wrong, you have to give them a very, very good life inside the prison. Firstly, we think that the first response to this one is that it's too cheesy, Madam Speaker. Secondly, we think that the difference is simple. When you have the idea of these individuals being in the harsh environment, it's a mismatch of solution. If you look at it, you should not give them, Madam Speaker, the good environment. You should change the society where they came from, and you should change, Madam Speaker, that harsh environment from outside. Because the POI coming from justice is this: if you're giving them a very good lifestyle inside the prison, Mr. Speaker, but you're still not solving the harsh environment outside, the tendency is after they serve the sentence, they will go out of that prison and still experience all those harsh societies, all those harsh things that's happening in the society. It means, therefore, that if it was true that you're making them realize that there's a good life which is a good life imprisonment, then it means that there is a big propensity for them to commit another crime in order for them to be on that same kind of environment. It means, therefore, that there is now a clear link between how you're going to solve these problems. We think that you only solve those problems by showing to the society that you may have been in the harsh society, but it's not good for you to do crimes still. This is the narrative that losing government is fighting for. That even if you're a poor individual, for instance, the solution is not for you to kill, not to kill any other people. That the solution for you is to strive better and have the government help you in order for you to move on. This is the wrong thing that's happening under opposition bench, because they are assuming, Mr. Speaker, that there's no choice when these individuals commit those crimes to start with. We think that's their choice. They're still accountable to that. We think, Madam Speaker, that they should be that they should suffer on that particular instance. But secondly, they told you that it works on a lot of Scandinavian country. That's the reason why, for instance, this welfare state, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, are doing their best to solve this, to have a criminal justice system that's the best fit for them. But the problem is this: when you talk about a welfare state, Madam Speaker, there's almost like to have a big propensity for them to have a lesser crime, and that's because government are already providing for free education, for instance, or even giving good opportunities to start with. What does it mean? It tells you, Madam Speaker, that those low crimes, Mr. Speaker, are not even justified if the society are already doing if the government is already doing their best. It means, therefore, that there's a fair narrative in the status quo right now that the government is helping you and willing you, and you should not do those crimes to start with. Under their model, there's a false narrative. Because under their model, it's okay for you to commit crimes because right now we're going to give you the leisure that you would want to happen. We think that's in principle wrong, Madam Speaker, because if you look at it, there's no justification or whatsoever why you deserve those leisure, Madam Speaker, and members of this House. Let's go to the first one. Why do you think that the justice system is better without this leisure? Before that, closing.
Now, you already said we could fix the environment that they came from, but why are you still subjecting them to the same degree of harshness outside when they go inside? Does it really destroy the same particular the same solution that you're trying to offer?
If an individual when he was a children was abused by his father, we're not gonna abuse him, Mr. Speaker, on the prison, and that's the reason why there's a minimum standard that we're giving under government bench. It means that we're still respecting his human rights, for instance, but still we're not giving them and affording him any other leisure. Let's go to the last one. Why is it a better justice system without these things, right? Because the justification coming from opening opposition is this, that the welfare state have the capacity. We think it's not about the capacity to start with. It's all about the implication that this welfare state are doing, for instance. Not just because you have a lot of money does not mean that you must invest into this imprisonment. Because arguably, Madam Speaker, there are still poor individuals on the welfare state, even if they are welfare to start with. It means, therefore, that the difference is that you have poor individuals, Madam Speaker, below the average, who doesn't even have those swimming pool, for instance, or even experiencing those leisures to start with. It means, therefore, that if you have to have a good investment, then why not invest in these individuals? But secondly, they told you that uncomfortability is not a standard, is not a valid standard of punishment. That's false, Madam Speaker. Because if you look at it, all the realization is contingent to the environment that we're fighting for. For instance, they told you that it's just okay for you not to have a free choice, Madam Speaker. But we tell you that if these individuals commit those crimes in the status quo, who are poor individuals who cannot even have those iPhone, there's no realization because there's no distinction on what environment they have. Because it means, Madam Speaker, that the freedom of choice they have in the status quo is not even maximum. It means, therefore, that they cannot realize on that particular things, right? But lastly, they told you that if uncomfortability is not a standard, then it's okay for you to give. That's false, Madam Speaker. Because uncomfortability will tell you that you're giving a universal narrative that justice should be served to start with. We think, Madam Speaker, that because our context right now is moving towards on saying that if you kill an individual, regardless of whatever position you have, regardless if you have the choice, you do not have the choice. If you're a victim before, you shouldn't do that crime to start with. We think that there's a danger for us to give this narrative in the status quo right now. We're very proud to close the case. Thank you.
Government said that we gave them everything monetarily, we fed them, we gave them education, but then why did they still do or commit acts of criminality? Because sometimes the state is not omniscient. Because sometimes not everything is economic, and sometimes it's social, and sometimes it's psychological. When you look at the acts of the shoe bomber, why did he bomb the plains of New York? We say, ladies and gentlemen, there was premised on him being bullied as a child. When you look at the killer, hardened criminal or killer out there, why did he commit acts of criminality? Because it's a product, that he's a product of a broken family. You see, not all those things in welfare states are already existingly rectified. And in those cases then, that means the existence of acts of criminality is still premised on the failures of the state, on the failures of society. And the question then is, how then does society fix and remedy itself so that the genesis of criminality is also remedied? But before we continue, one response. they said that there will never be any form of deterrence. But when you look at the deterrence induced by prisons, it was never because of living conditions we concede, but it has been predicated on the isolation, social isolations, restrictions of your liberty. Because that means that it also goes against your very humanity, which is you as a social creature, which is you loving freedom. That means deterrence will still exist in our side, and it's not exclusive on your side. Then the second question in this debate is this. What then is the trajectory that the criminal justice system go for? Is it in our side, which is the message of rehabilitation, or is it a balance on their side of rehabilitation and retribution? We think it's rehabilitation. Because when you look at retribution, ladies and gentlemen, there's two problems with that. Usually, it creates a vindictive society that ferments a cycle of violence. That we should always be mad at that person out there, and we should always retaliate. But on the second idea, when you look at it, and the second response is this. It's always an opium of society. It tells you that you do not have a fault in this. That you always, and that he did those acts against you, and you just have to retaliate, covering the fact that maybe he was bullied as a child by the very society that's persecuting him. We see that in those cases, ladies and gentlemen, the reframing of the criminal justice system to one of rehabilitation after this promise it down. We think that in those cases, the reframing of the mindset of society into rehabilitation, into one of a perspective that these individuals need help, is something important. Because by then, society loses its opium. That's where society reflects that maybe it is also our fault. That maybe we contributed to this. That's where, ladies and gentlemen, you lose acts of bullying because they know the events that will happen in the future. That's where they try to take away the social or the glass ceiling right now of the LGBTQ because they know that it may result into acts of criminality. That's where realizations of society of what is right, it comes into play. We think that in those cases, you take away the genesis of criminality, and that's where public safety comes in. Because you do not even create criminals in our side to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's where you even create a more cohesive society. That's where a society that works together because they think that they should help each other rather than be vindictive to each other. We think that's always a better society rather than a society that always teaches you to retaliate. But the second idea is this, reformation. We agree that kinda opening opposition discussed to this, but not in depth, and that's where we came in this debate by hijacking you, right? So how does rehabilitation came in, right? We think that it's a continuing process. But their question was, why should you create a beneficent environment for these individuals? Because when you look at it, and especially in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, usually you have to create the most conducive, beneficent environment for individuals for them to take away all deleterious influences against them that will hamper their growth. We think in their side, in our side, ladies and gentlemen, you expedite the reformative process of these individuals. But secondly, we say, ladies and gentlemen, that's where these individuals, Psychology 101, this is where these individuals engage the rehabilitative process to begin with. Because in their side, the system is still antagonistic against them. We say in our side, that's where the system invites them to engage it by saying, we will provide you everything. In those cases, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the start of the reformation happens at the end of the day. But the second idea, ladies and gentlemen, was this. But why do you need this engagement? Why do you need them to be outside of all influences? Because as we already told you, criminal acts are just a symptom. If, ladies and gentlemen, you try to regret it, the cost of that criminal act doesn't go away. We say, ladies and gentlemen, that sometimes we need them to engage because that's the only way we can delve deeper into their psyche to find out what really was wrong, what really created that, or what really induced them to criminality, maybe that bullying. And that's the only way we can reform them, rather than continually regret the criminal act that they've done, when at the end of the day, if they just continually regret, that's where cyclical criminality comes in, because you never solved the root of the problem in the first place. But before that, yes.
You're telling us that being a good person is contingent on the leisure that you actually have. The sad reality is, you're not going to get that same kind of leisure once you get out of jail. That makes the continuity of the process harder for you to bear with.
First, welfare states. But secondly, as you already forwarded, we're giving them everything monetarily. But secondly, we see, ladies and gentlemen, that once they go out, perfect segue for my second point, is that that's where, ladies and gentlemen, the continuing process of reformation kicks in. Because when you look at their society, in retributive criminal justice systems, once you go out, society still alienates you because they think that they should retaliate against you. In our side, by reframing what society perceives your act of criminality is, that's where you have a more accepting society. That's where they don't feel alienated that I should commit another act of criminality, that I should steal, or that I should punch or kill again. We think that in those cases, that's where you complete the reformative process that we've been trying to forward coming from our side. But the last idea, and the never engaged coming from this side, was this: legitimacy. Because we told you, ladies and gentlemen, that when you look at it, criminals are the most vulnerable. They are, ladies and gentlemen, at the throes and at our fingers to be abused or whatnot. We think in those cases, ladies and gentlemen, that's where society must step up. That's where they are the most vulnerable that we have to protect. And that's where the social contract kicks in, because that's where they should rely to it the most. We think at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at it, who best solves criminality? We think it's by changing the very culture that exists within your society. The only way you can solve it is by reframing the lens by which society views what prisoners really are and what the prison systems really is. We'll take this.
We thank the opposition whip and invite everyone to cross the house.